Amen. Welcome to Scottsdale Christian Church, and we are thrilled that you're here with us to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is all about Him, and the amazing thing about Jesus is what He did for us. So much of what He did was centered around us as people, and that just blows me away that the God of the universe cares that much about us, and it's just the opposite of our society today. In our society today, it's all about me. And people are constantly trying to do everything they can to show about me. That's why Facebook exists, so that you can have a chance to see what I'm having for lunch today. And it blows me away. And with the advent of cell phones, it's not good enough that cell phones have cameras, but now with the new versions, you can flip that camera around so you can see yourself taking a picture of yourself. And it's so about me. I was on the internet this week just looking at pictures and just said, you know what? Our church needs to see some of these pictures of people taking selfies. The first is a crazy dude. So had someone take a picture of himself literally just hanging over the street. And I think that this group, every time I see this group of people doing crazy things on high places, my palms start sweating because I'm like, dude, that's just so scary. But it's not just him. Some people are just unaware of what's going on around her. This reporter is taking a selfie at a spring training. Instead of watching what's going on at spring training, she's about to get hit in the side of the head with a baseball. This guy, it's not good enough I'm running with the Bulls and that someone might take my picture. I need to do it. And then there's this girl. Check it out. Maybe you should check out what's going on behind you. And when you take these selfies and it just gets so ingrained in our culture that everyone wants to be a part of it. I mean, it's even gotten into the airline industry. Oh gosh. I'm flying here in a couple of weeks and that scares me. Everything about our culture is about me. It's my likes all over the internet. It's my preferences. It's my dislikes. And anyone that disagrees with me, they're wrong and they're awful. But Jesus came to set a different example. Everything about Jesus is about others. It's about us. And we're going to look at that this morning. And so if you have a Bible this morning, turn to Matthew chapter 26. If you don't have a Bible, there should be one of the chairs in front of you. It's page 703. If you have a phone or a tablet, you can look up the U version and find Matthew 26. Or if you brought your own Bible, Matthew's kind of toward the end of the Bible, right before the book of Mark. Matthew's the first book in the New Testament. Matthew 26. And the background of what we're looking at today is it's the night before Jesus is going to be crucified. And so Jesus took his disciples with him, those 12 that were closest to him, took them to a garden, kind of a park area called Gethsemane. It's there that Jesus was going to pray. And the first thing we're going to learn about Jesus today is that we need to submit to God's will. We need to submit to God's will. Matthew 26, I'll start reading with verse 36. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet, not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. So the picture is this, is Jesus knows what's coming. He knows the full extent of what's about to happen. He's not surprised by any of that. And so he wants to be with his closest friends. And so he takes them there, and then the closest friend, Peter, James, and John, he says, okay, you guys come with me a little bit further. Okay, just stay here. Can you guys just pray for a little while? I just want to know that you're here. Will you pray? And Jesus goes by himself and falls face to the ground. And is just begging God, if there's any way to take this away, if there's any other way we can take care of people, but I don't have to go through what I'm about to go through, any way possible, let's do it. But not my will, but yours be done. And Jesus doesn't pray that just once. He prays it 3 different times. And he keeps coming back and he finds his closest friends. They keep falling asleep on him. And that gives me a little bit of comfort for the times that I've fallen asleep during praying, that at least I'm in good company. But Jesus says, God, what's about to come is awful, and I don't want to be a part of it, and there's any way but your will. I want to do your will. And Jesus sets the example for us in that we must submit to God's will as well. We are constantly confronted with the choice to follow God or not. And sometimes it's a real struggle whether or not we're going to follow God. Do I sit on church on Sunday morning and listen to Brian, or do I fall asleep when he gets a little boring? It's choices that we have to make. And we get torn between our sinful nature and our desire to do what God wants us to. In Romans 8, it says this: those who live according to the sinful nature have their minds set on what that nature desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. The mind of sinful man is death, but the mind controlled by the Spirit is life and peace. The sinful mind is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. And the last part, especially, the sinful mind is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law. Following God means submitting your will to his. And when we choose to not do God's will, we're hostile to God. That's what it's saying. When we're choosing not to follow God, we're being hostile to him. And most people don't understand that. They don't realize that. Most people's attitude is, you know what? I'm a pretty good person. I'm not bad at all. I'm not hostile to God. I think God's great. As long as he doesn't make me do anything I don't want to do, we're good. But that's being hostile to God when you don't submit to him. And that attitude leads to death. And so we need to do what Jesus did. We need to pray and say, God, you need to work on me. Because God, there are things I don't want to do. I don't want to go through this. I don't think I can make it. But then we say, but God, I want to do your will. I trust you that I will turn this area of my life over to you and we'll make it through. Some people struggle with gossip or bitterness or lust or stinginess or having a critical spirit. And you're in the middle of doing those things and they feel really good when you're doing it. Just that latest bit of gossip, just knowing what's going on in someone else's life and not being able to do anything and not wanting to do anything about it. You just want to hear the latest story. It feels really good that you know that information because it's like, hey, look at me. Because now I can look down on them a little bit more because, did you hear what they're doing? To submit to God's will says, you know what? I'm not going to listen to that. I desperately want to hear that story because there's some great details. But God doesn't like gossip. And so I'm going to walk away from that situation. In churches struggle to do God's will. God's will is for us as a church to go out and reach lost people. But I was talking with someone this just about a week ago, and there's a church that they're dealing with that the church is getting ready to die. At one time, it was great. It was a great church. They've got a great building and great facilities, but now there's about 15 people that are going to that church. And they refuse to make any changes, and they refuse to sell their building. And so what's going to happen is the last person is going to die at that church, physically die, and when they do, that building is going to go to someone. I think that's one of the things that is great about Scottsdale Christian Church and what we're getting ready to experience here in the near future is that there are things that are happening with us moving that we may not like, but we're saying, okay, God, your will be done. This is where you're leading us. This is where you're taking us. And so we want to go and we want to be a part of that. Submitting to God's will is something that Jesus did. I mean, he said what he was thinking, going through mentally and emotionally was just overwhelming. He said, but God, your will be done. Ultimately, despite his feelings, he submitted to God's will and he chose the cross. First thing we learn from Jesus is we need to submit to God's will. Second is we need to sacrifice for God's will. We need to sacrifice for God's will. Submitting is saying, okay, I'm going to follow God, but sacrifice means physically it's going to cost me something. In Matthew 27, you can flip a page or two over. Matthew 27, verse 45, Jesus is now on the cross. He's been there for a while. It says now, from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over all the land. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus on the cross, he endured a lot of things that went along with the cross. He endured the physical pain. He endured the emotional pain as people were out there on the ground looking at him, calling him names and taunting him. He forgave those people. But the thing that really got to him, the thing that made him cry out was when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? See, when Jesus was on the cross, he took on all of our sins. And so if you think about that for a minute, just think about the things that you've done wrong throughout your life. And think about the guilt and the shame that goes along with those things. I think most of us don't want to stand up here on the stage and say, well, hi, my name is Brian, and here's the sins I've committed in my life. Not just the things I've done, but here's a list of the things that I've thought. Most of us don't want to do that because it's pretty embarrassing. There's guilt and shame that goes along with that. The guilt and the shame for your sins and the sins of everyone in this room and the sins of everyone that's alive on this planet and the sins of everyone that's ever lived, those were heaped on Jesus at the cross. And when he took on our sins, God turned his back on Jesus. Jesus, who had been in fellowship with his Father for eternity, now had that relation severed. If you've ever gone through a period where a relationship has been severed, you know how painful that is. But even though Jesus suffered physically, emotionally, and spiritually, he still went through the agony of the cross. And he did it because of his love for us. In the same way, we are called to sacrifice for God. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, part of it just flat out means that you are supposed to sacrifice at some point in some way. Jesus said it like this. He said, in the same way, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple. To be a follower of Christ means that you have to be willing to give up control of everything in your life. That's kind of hard to do because we like to be in charge. And there are things that are happening in our life where we say, God, I've got control of this right now. And so, I know you're in charge of the whole universe, but I got this part. I can handle this. And God says, no, you give up control to me. Now, probably you're not going to have to die on a cross. Okay? You're probably not going to have to do that for Jesus Christ. But you are going to be told to give up things for him. Maybe you have to sacrifice a relationship. There is someone out there that is pulling you down. Every time you're with them, you start doing things you used to do that you don't want to do and you shouldn't do. And God may say, you know what, for a time, I need you to be away from them until you can be an influencer on them instead of being influenced by them. Or maybe relationships are broken because God says, you know what, I know that you've lived in this town for a really long time and you've got a lot of ties here and stuff, but I have a task for you somewhere else. And I need you to move. And whenever you move, it tends to cut off relationships. And so God may say, you may need to sacrifice because I have something bigger or better for you in the future. Maybe you'll be told to give up things like your time. Instead of being focused on how much candy you can crush, you're focused on, maybe you start to get focused on doing something impactful in the world instead of getting the best high score. Maybe you'll be called to give up a part of a career of promoting yourself so that you can take a career of helping others. Jesus sacrificed for God's will by accepting our punishment on the cross. And when he did that, it caused separation between him and God. And I think that when he was back in the garden praying, I think that's why. I think that's why he's saying, God, I don't want to do this, but I submit to your will. Because I know the sacrifice there is so scary to be cut off from you. But he was willing to do it again because of his love for us. That's how much he loves you and me. And it just blows me away because I know how awful I can be at times. And for Jesus to go through all that with the way I treat him is amazing. From Jesus, we learn we need to submit to God's will. We need to sacrifice for God's will. And then the thing that gets us is so good. We need to rejoice in God's will. Especially during Easter, we need to remember that we can rejoice in God's will. You can flip over, it may be on the screen too. Mark chapter 16 tells us about rejoicing in God's will. Mark 16, I'll start reading with verse 9. When Jesus rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him and who were mourning and weeping. When they heard that Jesus was alive and that she had seen him, they didn't believe it. Afterward, Jesus appeared in a different form to 2 of them while they were walking in the country. These returned and reported it to the rest, but they did not believe them either. Later, Jesus appeared to the 11 as they were eating. He rebuked them for their lack of faith and their stubborn refusal to believe those who had seen him after he had risen. Jesus had told his disciples, hey, I'm going to rise from the dead. They're going to kill me, I'm going to rise from the dead. But they didn't get it. They just thought he was just being a metaphor or something like that. And so when Jesus was crucified, when he was buried, his followers didn't know what to do. And for 3 days, they didn't know what to do. Because the guy that they were following, the guy that they put all their hopes on, was dead. And so they're like, and some of them started taking off. 2 of them started saying, all right, well, it's been good with you guys, but we're going to go on. And they start walking off. They go into another town. And when Jesus appears to Mary, she's amazed. She's just blown away. And so she is so excited. She goes back and tells the disciples, and the disciples are like, it's crazy, Mary. Yeah, who knows? And so they go to the tomb, and they don't see Jesus' body in the tomb, and they're like, what's going on? And then someone else comes and tells them, hey, we saw the risen Lord. And they're like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. And then Jesus appears to them. I mean, they're in this room upstairs. The doors are locked. And all of a sudden, Jesus just pops in. And he's like, guys, what's your problem? Why didn't you listen to Mary? Why didn't you listen to the women? Why didn't you listen to those other 2 guys? Why didn't you pay attention? I'm here. I told you this was going to happen. I understand where they're coming from. And I say it like this all the time. I've been to a lot of funerals in my day. But never once have I said, okay, let's go back. It's been 3 days since we buried him. Let's go back and see how things are going. Because it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And so when Jesus rose from the dead, the disciples were like, I don't get it. I don't understand. And they were stunned. They were overjoyed. And in Luke 24, it even says that they still didn't believe. When Jesus showed up and appeared to them, they still didn't believe it because of the joy and amazement. They didn't know what to do because this was too good for them to understand. We need to have that type of joy in our lives today. We need to have that type of joy. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 4, it says this just very simply, rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. I looked it up this week, and the word always in that phrase, in the original language, it means always. All the time. Rejoice in the Lord all the time. Take delight in him. Look for things to delight in the Lord. If you've been watching March Madness, oh my gosh. March Madness is madness because there are so many times that it's amazing how many times a guy will take a shot at the last second from half court and he makes it. and you just see people erupt in joy. I mean, it is crazy, and there were times I have no skin in the game, okay? I didn't go to Vegas and put a lot of wagers on these games, but when these guys win the games like that, I'm like, yeah! And we delight in something like that. Or maybe you delight in when your kid is in a sport and they score a goal. You know, as a parent, you're like, yeah! And you take delight. We need to have that type of joy, that type of rejoicing in God. To have that type of rejoicing in God means that we need to change our perspective and change our attitude about our everyday life. Because most of the time in our everyday life, when someone comes into our workplace and says, hey, I'm totally changing your schedule and I'm going to need you to work extra, we're not like, yes, more work. That's awesome. Most of the time in our everyday work lives, we focus on the negative, we focus on the bad stuff, and we're not rejoicing in the Lord that, I don't know, we've got a job, or we have a chance to influence other people. You know, so many times I think we need to change our perspective and our attitude that we can look for things in our everyday life that we can rejoice about them. Now, some of them may be buried, sure. But if you really believe that God is alive, if you really believe He is active in your life, there's got to be something in your day that you can say, you know what, at the end of the day, a bunch of junk happened, but at the end of the day, I still know God was there. And let me just take some time to rejoice in who He is and what He has done in my life. You know, worst case scenario, I think everybody in here has a place they can go to at the end of the day. I think everyone in here has a home of some kind. I think everyone in here has a refrigerator where they've got some food. Everyone in here has someone in this room that cares about them. And you may be visiting for the very first time and not know anyone here, but I guarantee the people in this room, they care about you. I had a lady come up to me right before the service started and said, Brian, this is so cool. There's at least 12 people today that are here for the very first time. And I'm like, I know, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. But we need to rejoice in the Lord. And the reason we ultimately rejoice in the Lord is this. When Jesus rose from the dead, He said, I conquered death. I beat death. Now, if you're going to spend your life on this earth following someone, don't you want to follow the guy that can tell us what's on the other side? We're all going to die. That's just going to happen. And we don't like to talk about that a lot, but it's going to happen. I'm concerned about what happens after I die, because eternity, that's a lot longer than 44 years. And Jesus is the one that beat death and says, okay, you want to see eternity, having life for eternity? Follow me. I've been there. I've done that. I'll take you through. And that's why as Christians, we celebrate Easter, because there have been a lot of religious leaders that have led a lot of people and they've died. And we can go and figure out where they were buried. We can pull up their bones and say, yep, that's where this person was. But when you go to the nation of Israel today, and you go to where the tomb where Jesus was buried, and you look in that tomb, you're going to see that it's empty, because He rose from the dead and said, follow me. And that's something we rejoice in. Jesus sets the example that we need to submit to God's will. We need to let Him be in charge. We need to sacrifice for God's will. That means when God says, hey, I need you to give this up so you can follow me, we say, okay, I may not like it, but your will be done. And third, we rejoice in God's will. It starts with the resurrection of Jesus Christ, but it continues into our everyday life today. When you get those thoughts in your head, it's got to be a change in attitude. It's got to be the idea where it's not all about me. I don't know how much science you all follow, but science discovered something this week. They discovered the center of the universe. And so I think we have a picture. The Hubble telescope takes pictures, and they're able to get so crazy close. And so if you look there, they zoomed in there. And in the middle of that part, they zoomed in even further. And in the middle of that, they zoomed in even further, and they found the center of the universe. I'm here to tell you all, you are not the center of the universe any more than I am. Jesus Christ is the center of the universe. And when we get that from our head into our hearts, things can begin to transform. When we come to the place that we understand and follow God's will, life gets better. We become others-centered and Jesus-centered instead of self-centered. I'll tell you what, Facebook can use a lot less pictures of you and a lot more pictures of Jesus. The key to understanding this, it's not about me, the key to understanding this is saying, you know what, I need to take the step to follow him. And it begins with this, that I submit to God's will. I say, God, you're in charge. And I turn my life over to you. I am willing to admit that your son is the Lord of this universe. I'm willing to turn my life over to him. I'm willing to submit to being baptized. That's the place you start. And then you spend the rest of your life turning over the rest of the pieces to him. And I'll tell you what, as you do that, you're going to find he leads your life a lot better than you can. And it's so worth it. I just ask that you all stand up where you are right now. If you need to talk to someone about your relationship with Jesus Christ, if you want to talk to someone about beginning a relationship with Jesus Christ, why don't you come meet me up front as we sing this song.